Hi and welcome back. So if you watched the last video, we compared the gut axis to a basic ship structure and we've covered its basic anatomy. Within the ship, we need to have workers to keep things running efficiently. Some of these workers can be referred to as the gut biome or the microbiome, or some call it the microbiota. All these names refer to a massive collection of tiny organisms that populate our gut. That means there's more of them than of us. So this ecosystem of organisms includes huge numbers of bacteria, also some protozoans, some fungi, and some viruses that live along undigested fiber particles. It is worth noting that in a healthy gut, there is a balance of pathogenic and non-pathogenic organisms at any given time, meaning some are beneficial and some may be harmful depending on their numbers in relation to one another, and other factors such as integrity of the mucosa and a person's immune capacity. This is relevant especially when there is an unbalance between the good and the bad bacteria, because when that happens, we can start to notice unpleasant symptoms, and depending on the situation, a person may be prescribed antibiotics, which work either by killing bacteria or having, basically that means they have bactericidal properties, or inhibiting their growth, bacteriostatic properties. So the four primary groups of bacteria that live in the gut are firmicutes, and I like this word, firmicutes. These love pectins, which is a type of fiber that we get from citrus fruit, apples, pears, etc. And then there's the bacteroidetes. These love something called inulin and fat. And then there's actinobacteria. These love something called fructans, which is another type of fiber that comes from onions, leeks, garlic, etc. And the fourth one is called proteobacteria, which are kind of like the bad guys. They are pathogenic or disease-causing. Alright, so for the time being, we'll keep these explanations very simple. We really just want to show how the systems are linked and how they work. I am already working on another video to be part of the series where I want to do a deeper dive into the different types of bacteria living in our gut, and I want to cover how they are categorized, what they feed on, what they're known for, and other cool stuff. Okay, so we haven't talked about how these bacteria get to our gut. So there are many ways that happens. Initially, during birth, baby goes through the birth canal, which is populated with some of these types of beneficial bacteria. Some of it gets passed on from mom to the baby. Okay, but back to what these microbes do. These microbes are incredible workers and very efficient at combining different molecules to synthesize new chemicals in our gut. The word chemicals here is used to describe molecules that these bacteria make in the gut, such as neurotransmitters, hormones, and neuropeptides, which enable neurons to communicate with each other. By enabling communication between each other, they are able to send signals through long neural networks and through the vagus nerve. In other words, neurotransmitters are helping your brain make sense of what is happening in your gut. So we've already named what these neurotransmitters are, but we haven't talked about the different types. So there's serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. They help regulate mood, behavior, sleep, appetite, memory, and sex. Okay, neurotransmitters are released by neurons from synapse to synapse, and their release is triggered by an electrical impulse. I'll talk about the gut serotonin mechanism in a minute, but first let's name all the other messenger molecules synthesized by the microbiome. Okay. Hormones are released by endocrine glands and are transmitted through blood, while neurotransmitters are transmitted across the synaptic clefts. And I'll put a picture here so that becomes more easy to understand. Hormones are part of the endocrine system, and neurotransmitters are part of the nervous system. Now, how are hormones different from neurotransmitters if they are made by the same bacteria in the gut? So hormones act on distant sites from where it is produced, and neurotransmitters are in direct opposition to their target cells. Hormones may take slower to act, but their actions are long-lasting, while neurotransmitters are faster, but their effect doesn't last as long. The bacteria in our gut also play a major role in the metabolism of hormones. And by metabolism of hormones, I mean they are involved in influencing hormone balance by deciding when to produce more hormones and when to break down hormones. And this is important because they can drive the production of hormones like ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and sex hormones like estrogen, among others. Okay, so we've talked about how bacteria are like little workers that are able to synthesize different molecules and make things like neurotransmitters like serotonin and hormones such as ghrelin. But we've also said that the microbiome also produces something called neuropeptides. So what are neuropeptides and how are these different from neurotransmitters and hormones? So neuropeptides are larger molecules and they have more receptor sites in the brain, which means they can influence more places. And they can influence neurotransmitter activity in the gut. They can act kind of like hormones, having long-lasting cascading effects through the brain-gut axis. Okay, so we're gonna talk more about fiber, and something worth mentioning is that chemists and the clinical community classify fiber differently. So chemists classify fiber according to its ability to dissolve in water. So in food science terms, it can be soluble or insoluble. That is why you might still see these words used by the food industry and supplement manufacturers. Their definition is based on analytical methods, not physiological effects in the body. In medicine, all fiber can be considered functional fiber and it is measured as total fiber, meaning there are different types of non-digestible carbohydrates that are good for us. That's what functional means. For our purposes, we'll use standardized terminology by the National Academy of Sciences Food and Nutrition Board. Dietary fiber refers to non-digestible carbohydrates and linen, Lignin, that are intact and basically intrinsic in plants. So dietary fiber, these non-digestible carbohydrates and linen, are cellulose, hemicellulose, pectin, lignin, gums, beta-glucans, fructans, and resistant starches. Functional fiber is non-digestible carbohydrate that has been isolated, extracted, or manufactured, and have been shown to have some beneficial effects in humans. In addition to the ones named before, the manufactured fibers are chitin and chitosan, polydextrose, and polyols. There's also something called psyllium, which is sold as a supplement as well, and resistant dextrins. Fiber acts as a sponge, soaking up water, which adds softness and size, so basically makes stools bulky and helps them pass through the intestinal tract. This helps to avoid constipation and potentially other serious issues related to inflammation of the colon and diverticulitis. So when it comes to the gut-brain axis, gut bacteria eat and break down undigested fiber, and this undigested fiber can come from grains, vegetables, fruits, and mushrooms. By breaking down these fibers, they are able to produce molecules called short-chain fatty acids, which are a big deal in gut and brain health. They are involved in many metabolic pathways, meaning they can have an impact on glucose levels or blood sugar levels, lipid levels, and basically good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and how those are used to make energy in the body. Short chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, get their name because they are, as their name suggests, short chains of 2 to 6 carbon atoms with a carboxyl group at one end. Short fatty acids have a polar head and a non-polar tail, which means that this combination in polarity allows them to dissolve in water better than their longer fatty acid chains, which means they can move across cell membranes more easily. Okay, there are 3 main types of short chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. The first one is called acetate. Okay, acetate is the shortest and most abundant of them. Acetate is needed to make cholesterol, which is a key component of cell walls and a base ingredient for making hormones and bile. The second one is called propionate, propionate, which is made up of 3 carbons. It's not as abundant, so it's a little bit longer than acetate. It's not as abundant as acetate. It is made in the liver mostly, and it is key in regulating appetite because it signals fullness or satiety by interacting with receptors in the gut. So when it interacts with these receptors, they trigger the release of hormones, which travel through the vagus nerve to tell the brain that we've had enough to eat. So propionate, I can't say that. Propionate is also a precursor in gluconeogenesis, which means it is a required substance for turning things that are not carbohydrates into glucose. So just to briefly explain what this means, gluconeogenesis is something your body has to do when there isn't enough glucose floating in your bloodstream. And as you know, or you may know, you may not know, glucose is the preferred form of energy. It's what your body uses to make energy. So when there isn't enough glucose from carbohydrate sources, your body has to turn something else into glucose. And that's what gluconeogenesis is. And that's what propionate helps with. So in other words, during fasting, propionate is one of the key players in helping your body use its glycogen reserves. Glycogen is something that it's basically glucose that gets stored in the liver. This is different from gluconeogenesis, which is converting fat into glucose. Okay, so I'm keeping this very high level, but these are really important because this is basically how our body makes energy. And last but not least, we have butyrate, which is the longest and least abundant of the 3, but perhaps the most important in terms of gut health, because butyrate feeds something called colonocytes. Colonocytes is just another name for cells lining the colon. And butyrate is the primary source of energy for these cells, and it is a key component in maintaining a healthy gut lining because these cells need energy to produce a healthy amount of mucus, which may sound gross, I am realizing that, but a healthy mucosa is going to prevent harmful things from passing through the gut into the bloodstream. So a healthy mucosa is good. A healthy mucosa prevents permeability. A raincoat is less permeable than a sweater. A sweater is going to let lots of water through, whereas a raincoat will prevent water from going through. So the mucosa prevents permeability and bad things from passing through the intestinal membrane, and it needs butyrate to stay healthy. Okay, so this was a basic explanation for why some people get leaky gut. Leaky gut syndrome is essentially intestinal permeability. And that's what happens when their small intestine becomes more permeable, allowing bacteria, toxins, and undigested food particles passing into the bloodstream. Another really interesting thing about butyrate producing bacteria is that they are linked to anti-cancer pathways. And I am linking one very recent study below It is a systematic review that found that inulin supplementation, and you might find inulin if you've never heard of it, any granola bars. Anytime you see something that says high in fiber, check out the nutrition label and you'll find inulin as one of the ingredients. So inulin is a type of fiber that may reduce colorectal cancer. Basically show that supplementation of inulin in rats increased the numbers of good bacteria through the competitive exclusion of harmful species. Basically, it helps good bacteria beat up bad bacteria, as well as increasing colonic short-chain fatty acid levels, which helps lower intestinal pH, which bad bacteria don't like. So that's what that means. That's what competitive exclusion of harmful species means. Beyond gut health, I am personally interested in learning more about other butyrate benefits for metabolism and overall health. And on that note, nutrigenomics research. So nutrigenomics is the field of science that looks into food and how nutrients can influence gene expression. And scientists in this field are continuing to make sense of butyrate's impact on gene expression. The literature also highlights butyrate's interesting effects on inflammation, energy balance, and its potential role in obesity. Okay, so we've covered the basic definition of what the microbiome is and why it is built as its own ecosystem, and how it is made up of beneficial bacteria, some pathogenic bacteria, and other organisms, and how balance is important for these bacteria to help produce the messenger molecules that are going to enable communication between the gut and the brain, and also enable localized processes by synthesizing hormones and releasing them via the endocrine system. We've also talked about fiber and its role powering some of the bacteria that make up these very important messenger molecules, and also short-chain fatty acids, which are important because their structure allows them to travel in and out of cell membranes. Butyrate is the main source of energy for colonocytes, which are colon cells. In my next video, I'll connect all the dots and talk about how all the systems work together and how emotions are enabled by the gut-brain axis. So I'll see you on the next one.